again, I want to welcome everybody to the Knoxville History Project, our weekly Zoom on a Thursday night. We've been doing this since last May. If you're not already familiar, the mission of the Knoxville History Project is to research and promote the history and culture of Knoxville. We were able to get a couple of new art wraps out on the streets. The first one went up, I think, Tuesday, which is an untitled landscape by Will Henry Stevens. Not technically a Knoxville artist, but he was a teacher down in New Orleans and was here many times in the late 1920s and 1930s. And he taught a summer school in Gatlinburg, but he exhibited artwork in Knoxville and was quite well known and appreciated. And this is a painting that also that's part of the collection at the Knoxville Museum of Art. And this wrap is the closest to the museum. It's on the corner of Western Avenue and 11th Street. So if you're familiar with that, not just a few hundred yards really, or a quarter of a mile from our office. So that's the first one we did, and that was funded by a grant from the Tennessee Arts Commission, our second grant in the last couple of years. As part of the grant, we have to raise money to do a second one, which is part of the grant match. And the second one is this photograph, a very famous photograph. Many of you may be familiar with it, by the Naffel brothers, Madonna and Child from 1899. And this is from the collection at UT as part of the McClung Museum of Natural History and Culture. And we've been itching to get this on the streets for a long time. And this is, in background, you can just make out the First Presbyterian Church. So it's on the southeast corner of State Street and Church. And it's sponsored by Graphic Creations, which is the company that we work with locally to install these. So we've actually done 24. We've got 5 more in the works. The next 4 are going to be along a kind of first stretch of Magnolia Avenue as part of the Streetscapes Improvement Program from the city of Knoxville. So there'll be a Charles Griffin Farr painting at Hall of Fame Drive as it intersects with Magnolia. We've got a Joseph Delaney, we've got a Buford Delaney, and we have our 3rd Ruth Cobb Rice painting. The next 4 will be up in the next 4 to 6 weeks.
All right, thanks everybody for joining us tonight. It's I'm very much privileged to introduce my friend Robert Booker, who actually helped us get started about 6 years ago at the Knoxville History Project. He's one of our original founding board members here. He has written history of Knoxville, but unlike me, he has made history in Knoxville as well. He was a civil rights activist, very effective one, I think, about 60 years ago, leader of the sit-in movements in 1960 here in town. Was a pioneer politician, was the first Black person elected to state legislature from this district. Later on did some time on city council and has been an advisor to several politicians and mayors and others. He was for a long time was the director of the Beck Cultural Exchange Center, very influential director there for quite a long time. He has written several books. We'll be talking especially about one this evening, but his book about the 200 years of Black culture in Knoxville is great. His book about the race riots of 1919, his own personal memoir about growing up on the bottom is worth reading as well. But we're grateful to have him here tonight. Of course, he also is a columnist for the great Knoxville News Sentinel. He's here tonight to talk about Knoxville College, which was a very important institution. A few years ago, we put out a publication called 25 Reasons Knoxville Matters, and Knoxville College was actually one of the top 10 or so reasons that Knoxville Matters, a very important institution, and we'll be talking about the history of that college, which happens to be his alma mater. But Mr. Booker, thanks. Welcome to our Thursday night Zoom, and I appreciate you coming out. We're all here, by the way, in the Carpenters Union Hall on Gallows Hill, the world headquarters of the Knoxville History Project. And Bob is upstairs in our special room for visiting Zoomers. Take it away, Bob.
Oh, thanks for inviting me, Jack. And ladies and gentlemen, I'm honored that I've been invited to come and speak to the group again. And Jack says he wants me to come back next week to talk on a different subject. I'm not sure I'll be up to snuff on all of that, but I'll give it my best shot. I'm happy tonight to be able to talk about Knoxville College. Knoxville College has been in this community a very long time. Unfortunately, it's not in the shape that it ought to be in today. In fact, in essence, it's closed. But what I'm going to try to do is talk about the history of the college, and I'm going to do it in a way I've never done before. Usually I show a slide program and I just look at the slides. We're going to have some pictures later on. Usually I just look at the slides and talk from there. I do a lot of facts and a lot of dates. But tonight I'm going to do it a little different. I will have facts and I'm going to have dates. But what I'm going to try to do is make it all personal from the point of the people who established Knoxville College, the people who nurtured Knoxville College, and really made it what it was. And I'm hoping through that effort, I will be able to tell the story of Knoxville College and not bore you to death at the same time. I graduated from Knoxville College in 1962. And I enjoyed myself there those years. I was president of the student government for 2 terms. In fact, when I was a freshman at Knoxville College, I was about 4 years older than the average freshman because I was just getting out of the Army. And I saw some things going on the campus that students could be involved in, should be doing. And I thought I would run for president of the student body at the end of my freshman year, but they hastily made a rule that no freshman could run for president of student government. So I ran for vice president of student government and won. And the next year, at the end of my sophomore year, I did run for president of student government and I became president. And I was reelected the end of my junior year. I'm only the second person to have done that. The other person who did it before me was Joseph Roberts. And he wound up as the pastor of Martin Luther King Jr.'s church in Atlanta. So I guess I followed in good footsteps in being elected president of student government 2 times. Knoxville College came about in a very interesting way. There was a young preacher from Ireland who came over here to work with the Indians in this country. And he rode a little pony around on his visits to one community or another. And then he discovered that, the Civil War had broken out, and he discovered that Black people were coming to Nashville in masses. And he thought he could do a much better job working with Blacks in Nashville than he could working with Indians throughout the country. So he went to Nashville, and his motto was, I'm gonna feed the mind and feed the soul and clothe the body and that kind of thing. So he started the McKee School there. His name was Joseph Gillespie McKee. And he started his school in Nashville in 1863. But he discovered, like so many others during that period, that there were people who were opposed to educating Black people. And he really caught the dickens. There were people who would sometimes throw rocks at him. They would call him names. He couldn't find a room to rent in Nashville, for example, because of his educational activities. And many times he had to sleep on the Capitol steps in Nashville. And as a result, he developed tuberculosis and other things. And he had a very short life. But while he was in Nashville, he did what he could do. Now, this was 1863 in Nashville. In Knoxville, there was a guy by the name of Robert Creswell. He had come to this area to do a conference with one of the churches. And there were Black men who had watched his activities, and they approached him and said, Mr. Creswell, we'd like you to start a school for us. Laura Scott Chancellor had already started a school for Black children in 1863. But this was 1864, and these Black men asked Creswell to start the school, and he did. Creswell had the same problem in Knoxville that Gillespie had, or that the guy in Nashville had. I'm getting his middle name mixed up with his last, McKee. McKee, for example, thank goodness he was a skilled swordsman, because they would challenge him to a duel in Nashville, and many times he had to fight his way through the city. In Knoxville, Creswell had some of the same problems. People didn't want him to start a school for Black people in Knoxville. So I was talking about Robert Creswell, who started the school for Blacks in Knoxville. There were a group of Black men who approached him and asked if he would start a school for them, because Lawrence Scott Chancellor had already established a school for Black children. So he agreed to do it. But there were folks in Knoxville who tried to lure him into a duel so they could kill him, so they would kill this idea of having a Black school. So he went to Parson Brownlow, who believed in slavery, but he also believed that Blacks should have an education if they could get one. So he intervened for Creswell and approached the man who was leading the pack to do him harm. And the man said to Parson Brownlow, "We were just kidding. We meant the man no harm." So Creswell was allowed to have his school. So both the Creswell School operated well for a number of years, as well as the McKee School in Nashville. But both of them were under the auspices of the Presbyterian Church. And so about 1873 or 72, the Presbyterian Church said, you know, we can do better than this. We're spending our money and time on those two mission schools. What we need to do is establish a real college so that Black people can train their own folks to be teachers. So they came up with the idea of merging the Creswell School and the school in Nashville to build Knoxville College. Already they had property in Knoxville that was owned by Creswell. And for the first few months, Knoxville College was held on that property that was owned by Creswell. But finally, in 1876, they built the first building on the campus, and that's when Knoxville College was established. It's interesting that the first president came in 1877, and that was John S. McCullough. He was a pastor in Ohio who came down here. The Presbyterian Church said, "We want you to be president of Knoxville College." He said, "How can it be a college when those freedmen can barely do fractions?" So he came to Knoxville and really made it a college. Who was at Knoxville College at that time? Remember, this was just 10 years after slavery. We were freed from slavery in 1865. So in 1875, there were very few Black people who were qualified to go to college. So what Knoxville College did was to build an in-house school system. And they started people in the first grade, promoted them to the second, all through grade school. And then they had the junior high classes, and then they had the high school academy. So once the students went through grade school, they attended high school. The grade schools were discontinued the grade school classes were discontinued in 1921, and they got rid of the high school classes in 1931. There were many people who helped the college get to be what it was. And one of those was Dr. McCullough. I remember reading a column in one of our newspapers about 1874 when it announced that Knoxville College was going to be established here in Knoxville. And they thought it was a great idea that it would be in Knoxville and that local citizens would have a chance at a first-class education. But one of the comments that article made, which is interesting to me, was that the school is going to open for colored people only. There's no thought about integration and that kind of thing. So the paper was jubilant about that fact. But what they didn't know was that when Dr. McCullough came, he had 5 children. The girl who was the oldest one had already done her training, so she began to teach music on the campus. But the four boys were school age. In fact, the youngest one enrolled at Knoxville College, Ralph McCullough, in the second grade. So all four of his boys were at Knoxville College, and two of them graduated from Knoxville College. A third one, Craig McCullough, was when he was promoted to the junior class, he was the only person in that class, and Dr. McCullough said, I chose not to make him a whole class, so he let him transfer to UT. So he graduated from the University of Tennessee, while two of the boys graduated from Knoxville College. Now, Knoxville College started with just 6 acres. The Presbyterian Church came and staked out the property on Longstreet Hill. That was a Civil War battle site where General James Longstreet shot his cannons from that hill over into Fort Sanders. So they bought that property, just 6 acres of it. But as the years went by, Knoxville College owned 100 acres on that campus. And it's interesting how that property came about. They kind of piecemealed it. They had a glee club that was formed in 1892. And they looked at what Fisk University was doing in Nashville, going out with its Fisk Jubilee singers and raising money for the school, not only raising money for the school and building buildings, but also attracting students who enjoyed that singing. So Knoxville College decided it would do the same thing and formed this glee club in 1892. One of the members of that glee club was Henry Morgan Green, who later became a physician when Knoxville College organized its medical department in 1895. Dr. Green had finished earlier that year and went off to teach at one of the feeder schools. But he said, I'm going back to Knoxville College and study medicine. So he came back and was in the medical department until it closed in 1900. And he is one of the famous sons of Knoxville College. Having graduated in 1895, he served on the Knoxville City Council from 1908 until 1912. Green School in downtown Knoxville is named for him. He was president of the National Medical Association and the founding president of the National Hospital Association. So with the Glee Club and with other pieces of money they could put together, the college expanded that property from 6 acres to 100 acres, where they had a fruit orchard. They had apple trees and pear trees and peach trees and all of that kind of stuff. They had a farm. In fact, I was just looking at some notes today where they were able to have so much fruit and vegetables that they sold what they didn't need on the campus to the city. And the city was so pleased with their production on the campus, residents in the city gave the college enough money to build this agricultural building. Now, getting to these personalities I mentioned earlier, Dr. McCullough, the first president, he was a chaplain in the Civil War. And he left, it was Illinois or Ohio, I'm not sure which one now, but he traveled by boat to the south. And as soon as he got to the south where his troops were, he was taken prisoner of war. And he spent his whole time in the army as a prisoner of war rather than ministering to his troops. He was a very interesting man who spent 22 years at Knoxville College and did a great job. There was a young woman at Knoxville College who tremendously helped the school with its property. Her name was, I don't know, Jack. I'm getting old because I'm forgetting stuff. I've got some notes here, but well, anyhow, she was from Blount County, And she enrolled at Knoxville College in the early 1880s. And it was interesting. She was a very talented young woman, and all the women's clubs in town just loved her to death, and they invited her to their meetings and they entertained her. And she got her degree. She finished the normal department and decided to leave Knoxville College and start teaching. So she left, but shortly after she started teaching, she developed a tumor on her brain, and she was about to lose her eyesight. And the college realized that and decided to bring her back to Knoxville College to let her teach in the elementary department. But her condition continued to worsen. What the college didn't know but found out was that she owned 64 acres of land in Blount County. Much of it was timberland. So she agreed to give that land to the college if the college would allow her to stay in the dormitory. And they did, the women's dormitory. And I just read some notes this morning where the president of the college asked the board to do that, the board of trustees. He said that she is in serious condition, and within a year, she is likely to be dead from that tumor. And they also decided to give her $20. I don't know how often the $20 came, but he said that likely we will pay only one $20 to her. This was in 1895, probably 1885 or 86, mind you. She didn't die. The president's house on the campus came by through an interesting encounter. President Ralph McGranahan was on a trip to Jerusalem, and he ran into one of his old students. He had taught at Westminster, and she said, "Professor, what are you doing these days?" He said, "I'm president at Knoxville." She said, "Tell me about it." And she said, asked him where he was living, and it certainly wasn't on the campus. And she said, "Well, let me contribute some money to build you the president's house, build you a presidential house." So they agreed, and of course they used student labor and lumber and bricks and that kind of thing. So the president's house on campus is called the Junk House because the family that helped him build it were the Junks. So that's an interesting thing as well. Let's see. You might wonder about the enrollment at Knoxville College at certain periods, and I've happened this morning to jot down some figures you might be interested in. In 1876, there were 100 students at Knoxville College. 1886, there were 327. 1920, 424. 1960, when I was there were 720. And by 1971, there were 1,300 students on the campus. And of course, that was a mistake because they built Martin Luther King Towers to house them. And unfortunately, they did some recruiting they shouldn't have done as long as they had a GED. They said, "Come on, I got a place for you at Knoxville College." And of course, the school newspaper at that time didn't like the idea, and they talked about the thugs on the campus, that the people who were on campus really not there to learn anything, but I guess many of them were one step ahead of the law. So eventually they had to let many of those people go. And of course they were stuck with a mortgage on that tower. And so somebody agreed to let the Job Corps move in, and the Job Corps moved in and helped pay the mortgage on that property. So that is in a nutshell what I wanted to say about Knoxville College, except one tragedy that I think you might want to know about. Knoxville College in the early days, of course, was not on the water system. It was not in Mechanicsville. It was out, well, it was in Mechanicsville, but Mechanicsville was not in the city. Mechanicsville was not annexed until 1883. So there was no water system or anything else supplied by the city of Knoxville. And the college used cisterns. That is, they had large concrete vats that trapped the water that came from the roof of buildings after a rain. And that's where they got their drinking water. That's where they got their bathing water, their water to wash clothes and whatever. And one summer it didn't rain, and consequently the cisterns dried up. And President McCullough, who was a bit unwise in this matter in particular, decided to form a bucket brigade down to Third Creek. And the kids hauled buckets of water back to the campus to fill up the cistern. But what they didn't know that during the Civil War, there was an encampment of troops right where the Knoxville News Sentinel is today. And they camped on that creek site and they drank that water. And they came down with typhoid fever. And Knoxville College students did the same. A number of Knoxville College students suffered, and a couple of them died. So they had to scrub out those cisterns and find water elsewhere, and had to wait until it rained. So that's a part of the Knoxville College story. I think I've said what I wanted to say about it, except for the form in November. They produced 400 bushels of sweet potatoes. One of those potatoes weighed 6 pounds. They sold pigs to the community in 1921. So it was things like that the college did to stay afloat and to have monies coming in. One of the ways they got money was, as I mentioned, through the singing groups. They had a quartet that traveled to Europe in 1922-25 and raised a lot of money for the college. And they raised money like that selling bricks, and they made brooms on the campus. They made 50,000 brooms one time in the industrial department, and they made money that way. They had some assistance from UT because back in 1881, the state legislators had appointed a group of Black students as cadets to attend UT. Of course, UT didn't care to admit Black people in those days, and they were a land grant school. So they said, we will give money to Fisk University if your students will go there. And so that's where they went. But people in this area said, Fisk University is 200 miles away. We need to do better than that. So UT made the same deal with Knoxville College. And under the Real Act, UT funded certain things, the agricultural department, the industrial department, and things like that until 1912, when Tennessee State University was established in Nashville. And then they became a land grant school. So there was a Black school that could accommodate Black students. So Knoxville College lost that money from the University of Tennessee. Jack, you said you had some pictures that you might want to show that I could comment on.
We sure do. Partly, I think 3/4 of these are from your great book about Knoxville College. And
we could take questions. How you'd like to do it?
Bob, I do have a couple of questions from the chat bar.
Good.
The first one is about Beardsley Farm. You were talking about the agricultural center there. Is there any connection with Knoxville College and Beardsley Farm?
No, none whatsoever, except that Knoxville College owned that land.
Okay.
When they built Beardsley Junior High School in 1937, Knoxville College sold the city that land so they could build the school. And later on, it did the very same thing for the Chancellor School, because the college felt that those were places where their practice teachers could go. And so they were eager to sell that land to the school system. But no, there is no connection between the two, except that the land was rich. I mean, the soil was great for planting because it had been well cultivated by Knoxville College by that time.
Very good. Second question is, where was the hospital?
The hospital is where the auditorium is today. It was around on the side of College Street between the Chancellor School and the little boys' home. The Chancellor School is now well, it used to be a boys and girls club, and then some other group took it over. Wesley House now has it, I think. So the hospital was right in there. And after it stopped being a hospital in 1926, they used it as a senior women's dormitory.
Should we go to the images, Jack?
Yeah, let's go to the images. And as I mentioned, a lot of these come from your book was published about 25 years ago, called "And There Was Light," and it's the history of Knoxville College.
Knoxville College, the motto at Knoxville College was "Let there be light." So that's where the title of that book came from, "And There Was Light."
Right, we're looking at, is this the original building, Bob?
Yeah, this is the original building at Knoxville College. Yeah, this was the one and only building at Knoxville College. You see a house nearby, but this was the structure. Yeah, that was it, and it burned down in 1894. And they rebuilt it. They added a dormitory to this building in 1882. Both of those buildings burned down in 1894, and they rebuilt the administration building. That's why it's not the oldest building on campus today, because it was rebuilt. This was the little girls' home, Mcdill Hall. This is where all the young girls stayed when they were in grade school on the campus. And this was the little boys' home, built in 1891. And standing on the step is Reverend John McCullough, the president of the college. I say it was used as a little boys' home until they got rid of the elementary department. And then it became, well, senior women lived there, and then it became administrative offices. And lastly, it was the alumni house. Knoxville College alumni used it for meeting and party purposes. This is a view of the campus from the corner of College and University, when you see the original building there with the dormitory added to it. And you see a couple of the other buildings on the west part of the campus. I think there's McCullough Hall. You might see it was built in 1895. Yeah, as I say, both of those buildings burned down. Yeah, this is a more recent shot with the new administration building named for Reverend Joseph Gillespie McKee, the one who started the school in Nashville. And the women's dormitory, L. Nathan Hall, that's a biblical term. I think it means for whom God has given. It too burned in 1893 or thereabouts, and they rebuilt it in 1897. This was one of the early men's quartet, 1904. And the big guy in the back there was a preacher, John Bryce. I remember him when I was a student at Knoxville College. He would come back and visit, and he was such a striking figure. But this quartet raised a lot of money for the college. And this is one of the classes at Knoxville College. And there's one person on there I'd like to point out because he was outstanding in this community. Here he is. I don't know, my fingers, I don't know if you can see that or not, right here on the end. I'm not sure what you see, but this is James H. Fresno.
Is he the one on the one on the right? Yeah.
That's what right there, yeah, where your arrow is. That's James H. Fresno. He became a physician and started his practice here in Knoxville in 1913. And built his own medical building. As I said before, Black physicians couldn't practice at General Hospital. So he built his own clinic that housed other physicians and lawyers, and had a drugstore on the bottom floor. And in 1937, through popular vote with a newspaper, he was elected the bronze mayor of Knoxville. And that meant that he was kind of the liaison man between the Black community and city government. And when important dignitaries came to town, he was the one who welcomed them. There's a good picture of him with Cab Calloway, when Cab Calloway did one of his performances here in the 1930s.
I think he greeted Jesse Owens too when he came to town, right?
That I don't know. Jesse Owens just kind of popped in. Jesse Owens was a front man for a band at the time.
Yeah.
And he was doing a concert or a dance at Chilhowee Park. And he decided during the day to come by the college to, well, see the students and to kind of introduce himself. He needed no introduction, but I don't know that anybody escorted him to the campus. I don't know that. And of course, this is the Negro building that was built in 1910 for the Abolition Exposition at Chilhowee Park. And this is a building where Black colleges from throughout the Southeast exhibited what they wanted to exhibit in the building. Other people showed their quilt work and their jellies and whatever people wanted to exhibit at the fair at that time. But again, it was built by Knoxville College students and designed by a Knoxville College person.
It burned down, didn't it, Bob? Do you know anything about what happened to it?
Yeah, it burned like everything else in the park. I think, you know, Jack, just about everything in the park burned down at one time or another.
One by one, yeah.
Yeah, and it was one of those casualties. And this, of course, is the class of 1912. I'm not sure I can think of anybody in this class that I can point out. This was the normal class. I don't know if you know what normal is or not. There were the regular college courses that you would have today, but in the normal department, those were people who really wanted to be teachers. So what they did in the normal department was to teach regular high school classes with courses in, we use the word pedagogy, which has to do with education, teaching you educational psychology, educational philosophy, and whatever, to give you the kind of diploma to get you a teacher's license. That's what the normal department is. And this is a picture of the Knoxville College Academy in 1917. These are high school kids who at Knoxville College. That's what the academy was, rather than the elementary department. And I'm not sure I know anybody on this picture as well. This is a very interesting photograph. The picture was taken at Knoxville College, but I'm not sure it has anything to do with Knoxville College. The man in front with the cane is William Francis Yardley, who read law and became Knoxville's first Black lawyer in 1872. He decided to run for governor in 1876, and he came in fourth in a four-man race. He made a very credible showing in that race. He was described by the papers as an able lawyer with a quick wit. Standing beside him in the white suit is Charles Warner Chancellor, who didn't go to Knoxville College. He went to Maryville College. He didn't finish, but his mother was Laura Scott Chancellor, the first Black teacher in the city of Knoxville. Chancellor Street nearby is named for his family. And as we said, the old Chancellor School was named for his mother. He could do with lightning skill, he could do tall figures of columns. In fact, he traveled around the country and people would write tall columns of figures on the blackboard, and somebody would stand by with an adding machine, and he always beat the adding machine in totaling up those figures that were on the board. Directly behind Yardley in the back seat is W.E.B. Dubois, one of the founders of the NAACP. He was here to help the NAACP get started in Knoxville in 1919, just before the race riots broke out here. The rest of those men in the car, I see Dr. Fresno in there, and there's several preachers They were all, Dr. Fresno is sitting near the front with the white suit on, the white shirt on. That's Dr. James Fresno, who showed this picture a while ago. The man standing right near the car windshield, I just realized who that was, is A.R. Wheeler, who owned the Wheeler Mortuary in town. And the rest of them, I'm not sure about. Well, the names are on the bottom there.
Bob, I've got a couple more questions from the chat bar, and the first one is relevant to what you were just talking about. But James Spears is asking, is Fresno Lane in the center town community named after Dr. Fresno?
I would say so, yes, because there were no other Fresnels around. Presnell, James Henry Fresno. I'm sure Fresno, that whole place up there is called Raccoon Village, and they got that name by mixing the names of the people who developed it. There was a black developer who built that community, and a lot of street names came from noted black people. So I'm almost positive that's what that is.
Very good, thank you. The next question is, when would there have been a time when a student might have attended Knoxville College from primary through post-secondary?
Yes, in fact, one of my teachers at Green School, she taught me in the 7th and 8th grade. She was a music teacher. She started at Knoxville College in the 2nd grade, and she finished the college department in 1926. So she went through except for the 1st grade, all of her schooling was at Knoxville College. She also became the national president of Alpha Kappa Alpha sorority, the one to which vice president belongs. So those AKAs like to mention that, so I don't mind mentioning it for them. Now, those are some of the nurses at the Knoxville College Hospital. How many they graduated, I don't know, because I've never seen the figures. But what's interesting about that, UT also helped with that hospital. When they needed to hire a nurse, they had the facility, but they didn't have the money to pay the personnel. So they asked UT to help pay for the nurse who ran the hospital, and UT agreed to do that. As I said, this was 1907 up until 1912 when they built Tennessee State in Nashville. It's interesting when you look at some Knoxville College catalogs, when it comes to the industrial and agricultural department, you will see the UT president as president of the college and the Knoxville College president as the director of those departments. So it's quite interesting the way they were able to do that. Okay, this is a baseball team of 1924. I don't know if I know any of these people on here. Of course, the one of 1928, I knew most of those guys, at least I know who they are. But this is a 1924 team. Knoxville College had been playing these sports for a very long time. They began about 1900 with the baseball team and with the football team. Of course, basketball didn't come on board until about 1927 when they built the gymnasium, because they really had no place to play basketball. Through the years, they did a very good job with some of these teams. In fact, one of the basketball teams, I think it was 1958, won the SIAC championship. If I racked my brain, I could come up with what those letters mean. But it was very meaningful for us at the time that they won such a championship. And this is that college quartet of 1925 that toured Europe. They went to England, Scotland, and Ireland. And it's interesting, when I was doing this book on Knoxville College, I wanted to know exactly what went on with them over there. And I wrote the BBC to find out if they had any recordings, but they didn't. But one story I found out was that they approached the BBC when they arrived because they wanted to buy some airtime so they could have more people come out and raise more money. And the BBC said, well, we're sorry, but we really don't have any time to sell. But they were curious, and they said, why don't you sing something and let us hear what you sound like? So the guys sang a song. Suddenly they had time, and they would broadcast on the BBC. And at the programs in those different countries and cities, the person who was heading up the activity would get up and say, you've heard these fine singers, you haven't paid nearly enough money with your entrance fee. You got to come up with some more money. And you would hear the opening of pocketbooks and the jingling of monies. And people contributed quite a bit more money than they had paid to see them in the first place. The Royal Sons of Tet. These are just a bunch of guys who like to have fun. And this is what they were all about. The guy here on the far left sang in the college quartet. The guy on the far right is Maynard James, who was a teacher at Green School when he died. A number of interesting people in here who did one thing or another after college. Now, this is that famous quartet that went to England, Scotland, and Ireland in 1925. And there's second from the left is Dr. James Kelly Giffen. Dr. Giffen was a musician himself. He loved to sing and play the piano. And when he heard the group perform, he said, I got to take these guys to Europe. So he and his wife, that's his wife on the far right, they went to Europe and well, highly successful. The guy in the middle with the light suit on with the coat over his lap is Newell C. Fitzpatrick. Newell Fitzpatrick came to Knoxville College in the 8th grade. He was from Somerset, Kentucky. And people noticed him playing the piano and singing and that kind of stuff. And they said, this boy ought to be in school somewhere where he can develop those talents. So they took him at Knoxville College. He finished the junior high department, and he finished the high school department. He finished the college department. Then he went on and got his master's degree and his doctorate degree. And he was on the staff at Knoxville College while he was doing all of this, directing choirs. It was his idea to have a quartet. It was his idea to have an octet. So he was quite a jewel in the history of Knoxville College. And he retired somewhere around 1967. And the music department hadn't been the same since. These are some young ladies who were on the debating team. If any of you saw that movie, in fact, I made notes about it, The Great Debaters, that was directed by Denzel Washington, and he starred in Denzel Washington starred in the movie. And it was supposed to be a great debate between the small black Wiley College in Marshall, Texas, and Harvard University. Because that was kind of fictitious, but what wasn't fictitious is that Knoxville College had a debating team as well. And they debated Wiley College, and it was discovered they were on a par with their debating skills. So what they decided to do was have them team up and travel around the country, giving mock debates, showing people how debate should be done. Knoxville College was so good at debating that this was one of the stars in their crown in those days. And this is the Knoxville College Quartet. I'm not sure exactly what year it is, but these guys on the far right there, to my right, is Arthur Kemp, who wasn't a singer. He was the accompanist. Arthur's mother lived next door to me, and I would see him very often when he came to town. He was a teacher in New York City. And the one next to him is Matthew Wellman, who became head of the physical plant at Knoxville College. And on the far left is Frederick Douglass. He was from Marshtown, and he did concerts all over the city until he died. In fact, I remember speaking at his funeral. Quite a voice. There's Charles Warner Chancellor, who was born in 1871, the son of Laura Scott Chancellor. He had 6 brothers, I think, and 1 sister. They were all educators except one who was a YMCA man. He was a mathematical genius. He was taught at Austin High School until 1911. And then when the principal left, he became the principal there, and he was principal until it became Knoxville Colored High in 1916, and he was the principal there and stayed principal of the high school until they built a new Austin High in 1928. And then when they started building Beardsley Junior High School in 1937, he acted as principal for part of that first year. I met him briefly. I didn't know who he was when I was a freshman at Knoxville College. Our science teacher had him visit our class. I think this was in September of 1953, and he died in November 1953. So I barely did get a chance to meet him. Didn't know who he was then, but at least I did have a chance to meet him. This is Dr. James Allen Colston on the right, who was the president of Knoxville College. He came there in 1951, left in 1967, and he really put 12 new buildings on the campus before he left there to become president of the Bronx College in New York. The man on the left is Ambrose Caliber, who finished Knoxville College in 1915. He finished Austin High School, I think, in 1911. And he is the first Black Knoxvillian to get a PhD. He worked for the U.S. Department of Education. He was kind of the head person in Negro education at the time. And he wrote books on the subject. That's that with the 2 of them. And this is the administration building as it looks today with windows boarded up. This was a building that was rebuilt in 1895 after the building burned in 1894.
People are loving this tour. Did most of the graduates of Austin High continue their education at Knoxville College, or did they go elsewhere?
Well, a lot of went, when we looked at our student body at Knoxville College, most of the students there were from Knoxville. The second largest number came from Birmingham. We had a large number of people there from Chattanooga. They came from all over. But Austin High people did go to Knoxville College. They went to Fisk in Nashville. A number went to Tennessee State. Some went to Talladega. They went all over the place, but most, I think, went to Knoxville College. When I was in high school, there was a concerted effort by Knoxville College to get us to come. They would have high school day, and they would invite Black high school students from around the region, from Sweetwater and from Chattanooga, to come, and they would put on a mini concert that we would see an intramural basketball game. They would give us a spaghetti lunch or whatever and tell us about the college to get us to come there. And it was interesting to me when I went that day. I had never seen Knoxville College, and I had lived here all my life. So as a senior, I got on the city bus and I said to the bus driver, "Let me off when we get to Knoxville College." So he let me off at the gate. But that's the first time I'd ever paid any attention to Knoxville College during that senior high school day.
Thank you, Bob. Jack, you have any closing thoughts?
No, thanks everybody for joining us, and thanks especially to Mr. Robert Booker for sharing his time with us. This is a fascinating heritage for both the alumni of Knoxville College and for the city itself to have had it there so long, whether something great happens there again or not, and I hope it does. It's got a long way to go, it sounds like, but I would love to see it revived. If it doesn't, we have a great story to tell, and Robert and all the other folks who went there are a big part of it. I understand there are alumni all over the country, and one became the first Black mayor of somewhere in Michigan, right? There was
Saginaw, Michigan.
That's right. Yeah. So there are Knoxville College alumni became leaders all over the country, not just here in Knoxville. But it's a great story, and we're grateful to Bob for being able to tell it.